And we are rolling. Yeah? Yeah,
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. I'll let you start because you're the pro.
Absolutely. Well, that's using the term loosely, but welcome to the DoubleNeck download, everyone. Hal Sparks and myself, Richard Hunter, talking the world of hard rock and all that implies. DoubleNeckDownload.com, the website to get the podcast available on iTunes and everywhere you podcast. And then our social media links are up there as well. That's everything you know in order to get in on the conversation.
That's right. We've solved it or whatever. Yeah. And this week's episode brought to you by us not going to the Kiss cruise, sadly enough.
Sadly. Yeah, very sadly.
We're not part of it. We didn't get to go.
It always makes me sad every year about this time when I see the Bon Voyage pictures.
It's very sad. Yeah. We're going to do it. We will do it at some point.
Especially with Gene announcing this week that the Kiss Into the Road tour could last another 2 years.
Yeah. The Kidney Stones added an extra 9 months of shows. Yeah. Whatever. He feels freer and younger. It's kind of like Bernie Sanders' heart stints. He's got all the energy he needs. He didn't know what was dragging him down all these years. Turns out it was demon-sized kidney stones or whatever. And you know there's a fan out there. There's like, get the Gene Simmons kidney stone person to person. Like he'll show you his kidney stones and talk you through them.
The kidney stone experience?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's part of the vault now. You can get for an extra.
It's an upgrade.
The $50,000 vault has one of his kidney stones in it. It's not a whole one because he had to chop them up into multiple ones, to make them last. They were not indeed passed through his penis though, so they are not worth as much as the other ones that were salvaged by a fan out of the bilge pump of the tour bus in 1975, which are on display at the Kiss Museum in Auckland, New Zealand. They needed to put it there because they needed a space that they could create security from far enough away to guarantee the safety of the very special things that are in there, including Ace's short haircut from the Elder Tour right out of rehab and two of Gene's wigs. And so there we go. From when he was doing movies and yet still touring. So which by the way, side note on that, to make up for the fact that I didn't go, we went Kiss mini golf last night. I took my patrons from my radio show. I have a Patreon, so I took some of them to the Kiss mini golf as a hangout outing. Yeah, and it is one of those things where none of them are obviously Kiss fans like me. So I gave them the weird little Kiss tour. Like this is me nerding out in front of this is the door to the Elder. This is Eric Carr. So this is when Eric Carr joined the band and went, he died on the same day as Freddie Mercury and all the stories. And Vinny being the only trans member of Kiss, which is true, I guess now technically. And anyways, great time in general. And I got them to, you can request any song.
Yeah.
So the first one I always play when I go is Exciter off of Lick It Up, which is one of my favorite Pocket songs. And the other one is I had them play The Oath and Under the Rose because I was very inspired by The Door being there. And Who Wants to Be Lonely, which is one of my Who Want to Be Lonely Tonight. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I had a crush on the girl in the black bikini and the collar in the video for the longest time. It was brutal.
That was I believe a Desmond Child co-write.
Jean Bouvier, depending on how you want to pronounce his name. He co-wrote that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Desmond Child didn't have any part of that?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. He was the bass player in the Plasmatics, wrote Feel the Heat for the Cobra soundtrack. And I highly recommend his solo record, Drums Along the Mohawk, which is great. A little more kind of rock R&B-ish, but you can definitely feel the sway that's in Who Wants to Be Lonely in the writing there. And also, my theory is that for Jean's first music video, he took Paul Stanley dancing lessons. Because if you look at the Feel the Heat video, that's your assignment, listeners, for next time. Watch the Feel the Heat video, and you will undoubtedly see the Paul Stanley influence.
Okay.
In that.
All right.
I'll show that. I'm going to show that to Richard right after, and I'll be damned if I'm not dead on. You'll see exactly what I mean. It's this toss back hip shuffle foot thing that Paul did for the longest time, especially when not in his boots anymore. Yeah. So, all right. So So I made up for not going on the Kiss cruise by
clearly
going to Kiss Mini Golf here in Las Vegas, which I highly recommend if you're ever in
I
town.
hope, a little inside baseball on the Kiss Mini Golf there at the Rio
Yeah.
here in Vegas.
They're knocking it down, right? The Rio?
I guess it's going to be torn down. I just hope Kiss Mini Golf is going somewhere else. I don't know what the word is.
It'll be its third location. It does really well considering. I mean, there's tons of stuff when you go through these casinos where you're like, there's just nobody in there.
Yeah.
And every time I go, there's at least 15 people currently playing. And it's not a big space.
What I love about it is, well, first of all, it's better than its first location, I think.
All right.
Also, somebody got a hold of the staff and kind of smartened them up as far as like educated them a bit on the history of Kiss. And then I also love that, and this is clearly Gene's influence, that it's about 2/3 Kiss Mini Golf, but the other third is like a Kiss outlet.
It's
store,
Kiss Mart.
Right? Yeah, Kiss Mart.
Yeah, no question. And it's a lot of Gene stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's the band, and then there's a whole section of the Gene Simmons band shirts and whatnot, and then the Gene Simmons vault is right there, and the explanation of getting that. And then you can get picks from almost every era, individually or in packs. They sell air guitar strings, which is a empty plastic, I guess, envelope with a label on it. It's just, I mean, is the most Gene thing in the whole thing. But in general, like, it is definitely a store. They have a lot of the comics. They've got some of the more rare dolls. Yeah. Which is interesting, like the reissues and some variants on them. And then they have a little Kiss museum of stuff. It's like their own little. It's like every piece you would have in all the Hard Rock cafes across the country, all jammed into 3 holding glass cases from IKEA. They're very small, and they're on top of each other. So it's like the little Kiss remote control van and 10 Kiss belt buckles from 1976, and like all this stuff just kind of in a heap.
The biggest piece is they have the car
Eric Carr's car.
The band gave Eric Carr when he joined the band. It's a Porsche.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a lot to look at now, but if you imagine the time and the brand new condition and everything, that was probably a pretty cool gift to get for joining a band. I never got a car when I joined a band from the other people who were already in it.
No, and there's definitely there's a dent in the hood, and I don't know if that's from fans sitting on it while I was sitting there getting a picture taken, which, if size-wise, some of the fans, that would make sense. Or if Ace borrowed it and ran somebody over. We don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's still being sought out in a hit and run.
That's right.
79. Yeah. 80.
I don't know. It's parked in that car.
Well, I just hope if that place is going to get torn down, I hope they relocate. I've also noticed that there is a club there that has a music venue that has been trying to launch and get itself established.
Yeah.
And recently what they've gone to, it appears, is just booking a Kiss tribute band like 5 nights a week. There seems to be the same. There's basically a Kiss tribute band in residency there, which is pretty smart because it's right upstairs above
you
Kiss
can
Mini
see
Golf.
It. When you walk, when you come down the escalator to go to Kiss Mini Golf, you can see that venue right up there. So if they had signs just up there, you'd be like, let's do this. Let's do both. Like it's becoming, and by the way, I'm just saying, feeds into my theory that the end of the road is the beginning of the residencies.
Yeah.
It's the Kiss beginning of the residencies tour. And they're going to lock in here, and then wherever they are, it's going to be Kiss with some Cirque performers doing Kiss Cirque show, but they're live performing. This is my Gene, listen to me. Kiss performs live. They do their version of Love or the Michael Jackson one, that kind of thing, but with the live actual band.
Yes.
And the Cirque show. I mean, honestly, like that would be a pilgrimage.
That sounds fantastic.
Every Kiss fan in the world would come at least 10 times. I mean, you're done. Especially for
seat.
Ridiculous. And it beats out the other Cirques because there are other bands either where the members have passed or they don't perform anymore. So they were doing the Elvis and the Michael Jackson stuff. And I was like, I don't understand why they don't pair up with Cher and some of these other people who have these histories. And then they've got, instead of videos playing between songs and costume changes, they've got performers doing stuff. Like literally Kiss could do a retrospective of their outfits.
Yeah.
they could literally change. They could come out in their 1973 demo outfits and go all the way to a modern one and change a couple of times. And then they could do magic tricks where it's really Cirque performers in their outfits stepping off in another version of them, and they just disappear. And then Kiss appears in another outfit in the back of the crowd and that kind of stuff. Like, it'd be wicked. It'd be
They
so
could do
cool.
a magic trick where at some point Bruce Kulick comes out and
Right.
he's playing, and then he just evaporates.
That's right,
in
yeah.
front of the crowd.
That's right. That's right. Or Ace comes out and it's the actual Ace and waves at everybody, and then he turns into Tommy Thayer.
Yeah.
Instantly, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So but having these folks with me brought me to what our topic for this
Yes.
time will be, because as fans of hard rock, you and I went and saw UFO together, and you're a much deeper UFO fan than I am, and it was interesting watching the crowd there, which is a good mix. We ran into a dude who plays in Nerd Halen with me. He's our fill-in bass player in Nerd Halen, and he brought his son to see this UFO show, right? And as these like, be it hipsters or whomever, as people start getting a good idea of like, oh, this is a classic band I could dig into, you end up sort of binge listening to bands in terms of, in the same way that you do a TV show. If you're catching up, like all your friends watch Game of Thrones, but you come in somewhere in season 6 and you're like, all right, where do I start? Jesus. And your friends have to give you a rundown of where to start, just breaking down where you're going to begin with. And as I was going through the Kiss mini golf, I'm pulling songs, they'll play anything. So I'm like, doing everything from, like I said, Exciter to like modern day Delilah to The Elder to stuff off of Unmasked and stuff. But it's not exactly what I would, if somebody was like, hey, why are you a Kiss fan? What would you listen to? And so there are a bunch of bands like that where do you start? Like with UFO, for example, like if you were telling somebody who was new to UFO where to start listening, or and go, okay, these are the things you'll probably catch. They'll catch your ear. You'll know these songs, and then these other songs are the next level, right?
Yeah. It would be, probably their live album.
Right.
It came out, I guess it was around like the late, maybe 77, 78, something like that. It was called Strangers in the Night. Because one, it's a great live album recorded in Chicago.
Right.
But also their first few albums that had their most recognizable tracks on it, like Rock Bottom and Dr. Doctor and some of those, were already out. So you're getting all of that. It's sort of like a greatest hits album, except that not quite, because there's what was new tracks at the time on it.
Right.
That's probably a good overall representation right there.
Right, okay.
And for that matter, just quickly to follow up on Kiss, I think I might do the same thing there.
Double
maybe
platinum?
like with Kiss,
Or-
or Kiss Alive 2, maybe. Just because, and that might have something to do too with where I jumped in. I think that was probably, Kiss Alive 2 was the contemporary album when I became a Kiss fan.
Yeah, age-wise,
My first one was actually, my first album that I owned was actually Hotter Than Hell. But I remember going back to Kiss Alive 2 over and over and over again and realizing, oh, this is a highlight reel of all these albums that are out up to this point.
That's right. Yeah, and it had that extra album on it.
The fourth side.
Yeah, exactly, of studio stuff that would give you kind of an introduction to those. And like for me,
your introduction to Bob Kulick.
That's right, as a fill-in guitar player. But like All American Man and Larger Than Life were like, and Rocket Ride.
Yeah.
Those are all stick out songs that still last. And sometimes when a band does like a 3 sides live kind of thing, and then one extra thing, the studio stuff is like, well, we were kind of working on an album, but we didn't have it together, and it was gonna be half crap. So let's just use the good songs and we'll tack them on. And in this case, I guess that methodology worked in terms of Kiss in that regard. So, and the solo on Shock Me on Alive 2 is just awesome. Like, it is just something worth enjoying, and like to this day, like there are parts of it that sonically just still resonate so powerfully, listening to it. So
that's actually, I use that as the example of why Ace.
yeah,
Because a lot of times you will find this
What's the big
fundamental
deal?
well, you'll find this fundamental argument a lot of times with bands where, let's say, they replace an original member with somebody else who is universally recognized as maybe more technically proficient. And you can do that because when you got the band together, you weren't famous. So it had to be 4 guys answering an ad in a newspaper.
Right.
And now once you're world famous, you got a line around the block of every great player trying to get in on the gig.
That's right.
So that's what happened when Ace was replaced. However, if I always point to that solo, because I put it this way, I go, look, I was a 7-year-old kid who hadn't started playing guitar yet, and I could hum that solo. I mean, what more can you say about the ability to stick in someone's head?
That's right.
Somebody who's just going to shred their fingers off, that it's going to be cool to listen to. But if I say, okay, you've heard it 3 times, now hum it back to me, you're not going to be able to.
Well, you can argue that Eruption was the fast version of that ability. Like you could still do that. You can kind of, go through the melody of that in your head. The for me, his obviously his digging into how he played and the depth of what he was doing also had a huge impact on a lot of players, no question. I mean, and it's always easier to replace your original guitar player with someone who's more technically proficient because they can reverse engineer the guitar solos better. They can pull it off because they can pull off stuff that's more complicated, is the theory. They may not have the soul of it, but when you're playing live out with them or you're crafting something in the studio, you can make up for that. In theory, it doesn't always happen, but in the idea is that you can't get somebody below it. I think that was one of the problems that I think Queensryche had with one of their replacement guitar players after Chris DeGarmo left, was they picked a buddy from Seattle and they were kind of like, let's down res a little bit, let's get more of a Seattle feel. Let's not try so hard to be all metal and kind of Iron Maiden-ish in what we're doing, or Metallica-ish in the complexity of it. Let's just fall back into the soul of it, which is a mistake for a band like that, for me. And that goes to, like, when you're a Queensryche fan, like, and you're discovering the new band with the new singer filling in for, replacing Jeff Tate, and he sounds exactly like old Jeff Tate. And you're like, okay, well, if you like this, then you got to listen to Rage for Order. And Operation Mindcrime would be the entry point, either before or after that, depending on how keen they are to listen to an entire album front to back, because it's a concept album. It's a rock opera.
And maybe
throw somebody into the deep end.
Maybe for the sake of the conversation, greatest hits packages and live albums might be a little bit of a cop-out. If we're trying to look at the actual catalog of where to start, then I get that. I mean, if I were just to do over on my answer, then, I mean, if I were to say, with Kiss, I'd probably Destroyer. You got to start with Destroyer. It's
the most sonically pleasing one that still has the early Kiss energy to it, and there's a bunch of those songs in there that they still play live and that are anthems to it. I agree. I mean, I would go. Because I love the Sans makeup era quite a bit as well too. So. I would go, Destroyer, Creatures of the Night, as a phase over into that. And then, depending on whether they were a harder fan or a softer fan, whether they liked ballads or the other thing, I would either go Revenge or Crazy Nights.
That's tough because I guess, for the sake of the conversation, when I think about it, I'm thinking, okay, well, the album has to have, if we're talking about, I'm just going to give them 1 or 2 albums to listen to, then those albums have to have 1 or 2 hits on them, because otherwise you're going to miss out on the entire hits version of the catalog. But that being said, stylistically, you also want it to be a pretty good representation of the era. So and Kiss for sure.
Well, and this gets into also the gnarly aspect of being a fan and trying to introduce somebody to a band, because that's always going to happen. Because the minute you ask, It's like the paralysis I go to when they ask me my favorite songs at the Kiss mini golf.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, what would you like to hear? I'm like,
Yeah.
everybody else who barely knows them comes in, play rock and roll night, and then they're done. Or Beth. Somebody literally they played for a birthday. Somebody was there or whatever, and I think it was like their girlfriend played Forever for them, you know, for the whatever, which is very sweet. But I was like, I literally had to go, what do I want to hear? I can listen to any of it, you know. Like,
I always take the opportunity to give Paul's solo album a little attention.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I met a guy there last time I went, I think, who was working there, and he was a younger guy, so I don't think he had been a fan prior to the job there, but he had obviously taken the training very seriously. So he had brushed up on the catalog. I told him that, I believed Paul's to be the greatest of all the 4 solo albums. And he looked at me and he said, my favorite one is Peter's. And I said, really? And at first I thought maybe he was just being contrarian. But then after I talked to him, I'm like, nope, this guy has picked out Peter's as his favorite solo album. And I thought, boy, Peter Criss, I hope one day wanders in here and encounters you.
Yes, right. He needs you desperately. You and I are both in agreement about the Paul Stanley album as well, although we give due notice to Ace. Sure. And I do love the Gene a lot. I do. I mean, I like hearing his Beatles influences. I love his leanings towards, just doing When You Wish Upon a Star was a touch of genius. No question. It was genius. How's he not literally trademarked that?
How has he not trademarked
the word genius? Yeah. He's waiting.
Gene, genius.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
YUS. Because I told you so. Anyways, so but that gets into the issue. So like Metallica for me, like people would jump straight at I think Master of Puppets in the Black Album, but I think like Master of Puppets is a full record. End to end, bulletproof.
Yes.
The Black Album, I would say for people, if they know the hit, if they know Enter Sandman or Nothing Else Matters, they're gonna wander into of Wolf and Man and get lost and kind of not key to those songs. Yeah. So there was some definite that was the closest thing to a modern time to release a record, 3 hits. The rest of it is filler as far as the rest of the crowd. Now I'm a huge fan of Hardwired, the new, the newest one. And so I would argue, I would say, if you like, if you're listening, you're hearing them about, and you're like, somebody's like, yeah, I heard Enter Sandman, I really like it. I'm like, okay, I don't know where to drag you. This would be tough.
Well, for me, it would definitely be Master of Puppets.
Yep. Although Ride the Lightning, I love.
The first album. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
The problem for me becomes, do you want to know why everybody loves Metallica, or do you want to know why I love them?
That's a great point.
You see what I'm saying? So if you're asking why it's me, I'm going to say we're starting with Master of Puppets and then Ride the Lightning.
Yes.
You're actually going to go back one.
That's right.
We'll get to Enter Sandman.
I'm almost operating like an appendix.
Well, yeah, because if you think about it, do you want to... We lived it real time.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to show these people the evolution of the band, if you were to show them Master of Puppets and then the Black Album, if that's all they had to go on, would they think, oh, the band was more like Master of Puppets, or would they go, oh, well, that must have been a one-off because they're more like this. They're more like the Black Album.
Right. Well, that's the problem like hair bands had when they had big, acoustic singles or something like
Mr. Big.
Yeah, and Extreme.
Yeah. That's a better example.
Yep. I think, yeah, and that almost gets you into how do you introduce people to hair metal as an idea? Like when you're like, oh, you got to hear these songs that aren't necessarily the hit points.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna think it's Cherry Pie and 17 and a couple other songs, and then you're gonna kind of blow off the rest of it. And you're like, no, you got to listen to the first Skid Row record to get the depth of what was capable in those songs, and then Rat Out of the Cellar and Cinderella's night songs. There was some stuff where it's almost like an assignment. Like if you want to get into 80s metal, there are some albums you need to like absorb to get the idea out of your head that everybody sounded the same, because they didn't. That was one of the things I liked about the 80s era, especially of hard rock and heavy metal, was there was a lot of vocal variety. Stephen Pearcy did not sound like Tom Kiefer. Tom Kiefer did not sound like Winger. Winger did not sound like Mike Tramp.
Vince Neil didn't sound like
any of those. Right. Yeah. And there were definitely some copycats, and there were definitely people who had influences. Like, I would argue that Janie Lane was trying to sound like Brad Delp and did a fairly decent job of it most of the time.
But that's out of genre.
Right.
I mean, that's not
peer
to peer.
Well,
really.
and if you listen to how many people wanted to sound like Sam Cooke or what have you in the 70s, there was a lot of overlap of who sounded alike and whatever. And the standouts ended up being, like, to some degree, like Mick Jagger and like, that's why we like bands like, they had, like, Gene and Paul sounded so different from each other, and they had 4 singers in that band. I mean, that was the great thing about Kiss. It always comes back. But individually, that variety, that would be what I would introduce people to in that style or whatever. That's the deep dive in that whole genre. Now, there's an ongoing debate about Iron Maiden, for example. Like, the Trooper seems to be the lock-in for them as well, And I'm one of those fans who came in late, kind of like you did with Kiss and Alive too, in that I love Somewhere in Time, largely because I'm a huge Blade Runner fan, and there's tons of references to Blade Runner on that album, and it really caught me. And I love Wasted Years. I mean, it's just a great record. It's like Judas Priest, listeners who are like, yeah, love Turbo or whatever, and people are like, what the hell is wrong with you? But at the same time, like, that was my landing point, because I was 14 when that album came out, and that was right when I was, like, getting into the edgier aspects of metal, and I had missed sonically those albums because I didn't have, there weren't radio stations that played a lot of that stuff, and MTV was just really starting to give metal its heyday about then, so a bunch of people get that introduction at that point, and you're like, it's like being a Kiss fan and loving Unmasked the way I do. Like, if somebody landed on Unmasked because of the timing when they came in, like, oh yeah, this is the album that I became a huge Kiss fan when I was 9, because it had cartoons on the front of it,
Yeah. Very first track you're going to hear is Shandy. That's going to be your Kiss introduction.
Or Is That You, which is a great friggin' song, period, end of story. So anyways,
Shandy, was Shandy the first song on side 2? It wasn't the first song on that.
No,
album.
I think it was third. I want to say it was third, right. Because it was the ballad position.
Yeah,
it was Is That You opened it up.
Yeah,
but good, I think I want to, and I love Naked City off that.
Yeah,
that's one of those I wish they would do more on tour too. I hope all you bastards on the cruise are getting to hear Naked City.
You mentioned Iron Maiden for a second.
Yeah.
Because I just had a thought there. Yeah, that's a similar situation for me, because you're talking about a band who, with Paul Di'Anno, those songs, the Paul Di'Anno songs, actually, because of where I came in on Maiden, at first for me were Bruce Dickinson songs, because I heard him sing them live.
Right.
And I had the live record, and I heard him sing those. So I actually had to reverse engineer that to go back and go, oh, there's a whole nother guy, because that's unusual. It's very unusual. It would be like coming in on Van Halen, Sammy Hagar era, and then going, oh wait, there was this guy, David Lee Roth. There's another guy, maybe not quite as well known, but still responsible for a number of their hits and then landmark albums. But for me, just because of where I came in, Power Slave was a big record.
Right. Yeah.
So I would maybe
that seems to be the two. Like,
that's kind of their
one or the other.
That's to me kind of their Creatures in the Night album. If you kind of talk about that transition,
right? Well, and that brings me to, I guess, the quintessential one, AC/DC. Do you? I mean, because you can argue that, and people have retroactively, I think, to get their own cred, somehow patted themselves on the back for being Bon Scott fans after the fact. You know what I mean? They tend to talk a lot of shit, but there's nothing wrong with either version of that band, which is a curiosity. That doesn't happen a lot either.
Right.
That's an interesting thing. When the singers had a general gravelly tone, Brian Johnson being the extreme version of that, obviously, but Bon Scott being the slightly more like kind of bar version, I would guess, of that. But both of them had... it's almost like David Lee Roth to Sammy Hagar to some degree, as far as the incarnation of the band sonically, even though the root of it is exactly the same, which is, I would say, argue DLR to Hagar, the band almost changed entirely, shifting in style. And I think that's the influence of both Eddie playing keyboards more and the Music Man guitar, as opposed to the Frankenstein, the neck style and all that. Getting the guitar he wanted made, mass produced to some degree, shifted his style and made it a little more predictable, and kind of drove him into an area where, because he wasn't fighting the machinery, he then started experimenting outside of that, which is why the drill and those other things added to it. But
you know where I come on AC/DC is, and I am preferable to Bon Scott, not because of tonality, but to me lyrically, Bon Scott was, to me, he was reminiscent of Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry to me is sort of the quintessential rock and roll poet. Simple lyrics, but able to, but eloquent. And to me,
you think that his fetish about scat affected that poetry?
Precisely.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. And
just want to clarify. I agree.
So to me, I enjoyed both eras as well. In fact, I never saw them with Bon Scott. I mean, by the time I knew Bon Scott, he was dead.
Right.
I've seen AC/DC with Brian Johnson many, many times. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
But I will say that I was always partial to the Bon Scott, the lyricist. That being said, when I sort of rank my top AC/DC songs, you know where I would tell you to go if I was just going to give you one record to get started? Let There Be Rock.
All right.
It's got a couple of my Let There Be Rock is one of my favorite tracks. Also, Whole Lot of Rosie is one of my other favorite AC/DC tracks. I know sometimes with AC/DC albums it would get a little like there'd be a live cut here and a, like Dirty Deeds where there's some stuff. It's an album, but there's also some stuff we didn't put on the last
Cheech and Chong record,
yeah,
right? Where they just kind of vignettes.
Yeah, but I think I would probably start there.
Yeah.
And then maybe Highway to Hell.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of things we have to get to with AC/DC before I even think about.
That's almost
Back
like
in Black,
right? Well, that's but I would go. Most people would know Back in Black, so you could kind of just go. Well, obviously the album Back in Black. You know those songs. They've been played constantly. If you know any AC/DC that you're aware is AC/DC, because some people might hear Bon Scott era songs. From that period and not know it's AC/DC.
And I guess
when they're in a rock bar or something like that.
Well, I guess that's the question. Are we talking to someone who just doesn't know AC/DC, or are we talking to are we talking to somebody who just doesn't ever hear music?
Who landed here from space? David Bowie has fallen into Earth, right? And he doesn't understand. I would assume that they know the Back in Black record, and just go, okay, that it's kind of like the Black album for Metallica. I would assume Enter Sandman, and I'm like, here's why I like them or whatever. And if I was doing that, if for them, I would go, everybody's going to tell you Master Puppets. That's absolutely true. I would say Ride the Lightning and the Garage Days, because the Garage Days covers that they do give you a picture of their influences and their favorite bands, and that might also seed you into listening to Budgie and some of the other things that got them into it if you want to get to a real 70s kick. But Crash Course in Brain Surgery, the riff that they put together on that, and Bread Fan and those kind of songs, like tied together with them finding who they were after jettisoning Dave Mustaine in Ride the Lightning. had a purity to it that I really love. And some people will say Kill 'Em All. I think that was a transitional record of him being in and out.
Yeah.
And I feel like they found themselves, and then they got because it did well, they got the money to make their Destroyer, which is effectively what Master of Puppets is. That's that.
Have I ever, I don't know if I've ever told you about this or not, but it's just funny you mentioned Kill 'Em All because there are certain indelible memories, you know, where you just remember where, you know, like people who lived through the Kennedy assassination. I know where I was when I heard about it, right?
Sure.
I remember very distinctly hearing Kill 'Em All for the first time. I was in my friend Brent's 1979 Camaro.
Right.
And we were driving off campus for lunch in high school.
Right.
And he put that in his cassette deck. And we were listening to it, and I remember having two distinct thoughts because it was so unlike anything I had heard before. It was the first thrash band I'd ever heard.
Right.
I mean, up to that point, everything is Rat and Cinderella and, you know, those types of bands. I heard it, and I remember having two thoughts. This is the most unique thing I have ever heard. I'm totally digging this. Second thought, no one will ever buy this. This is this is commercially the least successful thing that will ever be attempted.
Right.
And I was proven to be wrong. But I remember having that thought.
Kill 'Em All was a retro album for most people. It did not do well comparatively.
Yeah,
it did fine.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, Ride the Lightning was the one that kind of took off, and then it, you know, I think KNAC was making bands back then, and they locked into it. You know. It's like Tool, you know, like Tool. KNAC made Tool by playing the shit out of Sober.
Yeah.
Sober is the most requested song in the history of KNAC, right? And when they were on the air, 105.5, you know, and they, like, I remember very distinctly listening to audio cassettes off of KNAC after midnight because, you know, my buddy Mike would tape the show. He would be up at night. He would just record the midnight hour of KNAC in Chicago, and you know, wherever he was getting it from, and those songs would often be the hardest stuff. They would, you know, almost play that stuff, you know, at midnight, and that was where you would hear songs from Kill 'Em All and whatnot.
Do you know? Speaking of, what did you just mention? You were talking about KNAC.
Oh yeah, Tool. Like and
Tool. Yeah. That's okay. So there's another quick aside, just because this is not worthy of an entire episode, but just something I saw this week. I don't know if you saw this or not, but Eddie Van Halen went to see Tool at the Staples Center, I think last week.
Oh.
And it was making news because nobody knows where Eddie Van Halen's been, and there hadn't been a lot of sightings of him.
Well, and he'd been battling throat cancer.
Yes.
That news came out.
Yes.
Caleb, you know, our guitar player, Nerd Halen, follows this very closely. He'd been fighting it mostly last year. The idea is that it's now news because he's going to beat it, or he has been, hopefully. We hope that's the case, so heal well, Eddie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he went and saw
Yeah,
Tool,
so he goes to see Tool. Now, he goes to see Tool with Wolfgang Van Halen. So it's, you know, father-son night out, go see a band.
Right.
They're at the Staples Center for the Tool show. Wolfgang, if you follow him on Instagram, I think it's Wolf Van Halen, he posted a picture of this.
Yes.
He's sitting there with Eddie Van Halen. A guy comes up to Eddie Van Halen and says, "Excuse me, sir, will you take a picture of me standing in front of the stage of So there's a photo. Wolfgang took this picture from basically behind Eddie Van Halen of his dad taking this photo of this guy, you know, in front of the stage. He has no idea who he's handed his camera to. Hey, random person, would you mind taking this photo? For me?
You look like you have good hands and you won't drop stuff. Like you look like you have nimble fingers. I'm not worried about you destroying my phone. Somehow I picked you out of the crowd. That throws me back to a time when I was at a charity event, and this fellow wanted a picture with me really bad. He was freaking out that I was there, and he handed his camera to his friend to take the picture. That friend was Paris Hilton, and she could not be more disgusted at the idea that she literally held the camera up, looked like, ugh, and just clicked, didn't even look while she was pointing, just like, and I'm like, that was one of my, I will hold that memory the entirety of my life. And that poor dude, like, is walking around going, this picture was taken by Eddie Van Halen. Like, Eddie's not even in it. And thank God Wolfgang took that picture, because that guy has that to reference on social media forever. Because imagine being back in the day, you know, with Kiss walking around without makeup on at some place and like, bro, get a picture of me and my girl, like, here or whatever. We're here to see Kiss. Like, oh, it sounds very interesting. You know, like,
Anyway, we were so that's kind of where I come down on Metallica.
Tool, Lateralis.
Oh boy, Tool. You know, Tool's catalog I'm not as familiar with.
Right.
Tool is a band that has, for me, and I guess at some point, I think all their stuff went finally streaming. So
yes,
you know, maybe this episode is for me after all. If I need to find a place to start with Tool, not that I'm totally unfamiliar, but it was just one of those bands that always just kind of existed on the outer edges, but yet never went away, and incredibly over those years has built itself a intensely dedicated fan base.
Yeah. Well, I just pulled up on my computer pictures of album covers, because in the case of Tool, sometimes you just know because of the cover. Like there's some, I think Undertow is probably the one that most people know from the album cover. It's this weird spidery looking thing. And this, of course, like this is the one that has Sober on it and Prison Sex. And they, was the birth of the idea that all Tool songs are about anal, which all comes from that album, whatever. But it's probably, there's when you go to these, because they don't, I think in a couple of them they've written the name on there, their original EP and some other stuff. But most of the time it's just funky art, like Anima, like the album cover. You're like, it's the big white square, when you're going, if you were flipping through the, buying CDs, now it doesn't matter so much because you can go on iTunes and you download them that way. But if you were going through an album and you're like, okay, it's the one, it's like, Led Zeppelin 4 at least had a 4 on it. They had it written somewhere on the back, I think. But it was like, it's just the one with the hillside and the naked kids, that kind of idea. I would say Anima and Undertow, actually, as, Undertow's probably the one, if they've heard some, that they would go, oh yeah, I know Sober. So you're like, well, you'll like the rest of that record. It's awesome. Then I would move people to Anima and, then I'm telling the whole catalog at that point. But Lateralis, I think, or whatever. I love 10,000 Days. And it's amazing when you, that's one of the newer records. That's just a couple, that was 2006. And there's a, excuse me. There's a couple of songs on there where people start singing it before they start because they know it's coming. Yeah. So there's a song called The Pot, which starts just vocals. So if you see them live, if they reference that song's coming, the whole crowd will start saying, who are you to raise your finger? That whole part, the crowd will just start doing it. It's really kind of amazing. And they'll do it well. They'll do it sonically sort of perfect, And then, so that brings me to like the bands where Boston, or bands which only have a couple of things out, because I'll give an example, totally random. Europe. Most people know Final Countdown and the main record, the Final Countdown that it came off of, and maybe they'll have heard Carrie, and they really need to hear songs like Ninja, which is what happens when English is your third or fourth language and you start writing lyrics.
That's like Scorpions.
Yeah.
That's how Scorpions are. Every time, there's so many moments with the Scorpions that I think, these guys are German writing in English. Like in Winds of Change, where he says, The
Follow
magic
them
of the moment on a glory night.
Yes.
What is a glory night?
Yeah, it's a good
I
question.
don't know what a glory
There's
night
no
is.
such thing. Glory need. In the case of Europe, I would recommend people listen to. I think the album's called Secret Society. That was the single off of it too. I'm gonna check myself now that I'm in a like internet mood. I pulled up my iPad on here, so I'm cheat sheeting a little bit. But I bought that album. Yeah, I bought that album on a whim because I was like, oh, they have a new record out. That's weird. This was 2006. Yeah, and like Secret Society, Getaway Plan, like there's a ton of songs on there. I was like, this is solid. And the guitar player, like clearly, even back in the day, was a shredder, and then ultimately a sort of a Zakk Wylde wannabe later in his life or whatever. And it's in there, and there's a certain heaviness that's kind of surprising, but the whole record's great. I like it. I mean, and very seldom does a band from the '80s bring back and do another record, and you're like, this is solid. I would argue that this is a little closer to tone what they sounded like live. They were much heavier live, and so I recommend that record as somebody like that's an odd one. Like, okay, you probably heard the Final Countdown. Listen to Secret Society from 2006. It's got good flow. It's strong, and it's odd in that situation. It's a good example of not going deep into somebody's catalog. Like, oh, you got to listen to the first record. Like, no, listen to the last one. That's a rarity.
Yeah,
and
that
it's
is
the same singer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like you got to listen to the new one because you'll like Hagar era Van Halen, and it's 1988, and you're like, oh yeah, listen to this. You'll love that.
That is an anomaly.
You want to hear them, right? But and then there's those. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other bands with kind of the deep, track of like the bands that always boggled my mind were like Skynyrd and those kind of bands where you're like, how do you intro? Into, I mean, it's almost you land anywhere. It's either good or terrible depending on how you view that kind of music. You know what I mean? You'll either get it or you absolutely won't.
Another tough one to do would be Aerosmith because you're talking about a band who has one whole. They're almost in the Roth Hagar situation without ever having a second lead singer, because when you talk about incarnations of the band, once you get to the mid 80s, you've got this hit machine that you're going to have to show some representation of that, but there was a whole nother life before it in the 70s.
And I, my sister was older than me and she listened to Aerosmith and I remember hating it when I was a kid, like hating Toys in the Attic and all that kind of stuff. Just didn't get it. It seemed very run of the mill to me, just toys in the attic. Like it just seemed like they were working really hard for very little. But obviously, Sweet Emotion and Dream On and like those are amazing classics that predate. That's the early part of it. But it seemed like they were, they had like two of those an album, and then the rest of it was just like get it out and tour, Boston touring band kind of style. I fell in love with them at Permanent Vacation and Pump. That was my introduction of like, all right, I like them now. And that might have been a factor of age and timing, or the cleanliness of those records and how just consistent they were, and, the Janie's Got a Gun era of Aerosmith is a very different experience. And I also do have baggage from them back in the 70s in that they were the bad guys in the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper Bee Gees movie. They were called the Future Villain Band.
Yeah, in
there.
Yeah,
I love their cover of "Come Together," which is another. They were a band that was twice revived by covers. One by one of another band and one of their songs. That literally Walk This Way being covered by Run DMC, salvaged them.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
that Greatest Hits album, because same thing. I mean, obviously anybody doesn't know, you and I are basically the same age, so everything is going to hit at right about the same time.
Right.
And I think the first time I saw Aerosmith live was probably right around Permanent Vacation. No, it was Done with Mirrors. That was the first time I saw it. But I think that was the album right before that. But
that definitely that era, and they were definitely like that. They were locking into that pocket.
But that Aerosmith Greatest Hits album with the red cover and just the logo, that's the one that was my my
Cliff
remedial
Notes?
course.
Yes.
I mean, that's where I went back and went, oh yeah, there's all this
and
stuff.
that's what they
and got
serve
up to
as.
speed to them.
That's what a lot of those albums are for.
That album, I remember, always had the Nice Price. Do you remember the Nice Price sticker? It would be like it was like a not a cutout.
Yes.
But there was, and I don't know if it was just one label that advertised it this way, but they were cheaper albums because they were older albums. So you'd have all your new releases and everything, and then they had the bin, and it always said "Nice Price" on it. There was a sticker on it that said "Nice Price." Yeah,
yeah. I feel like that's what Greatest Hits ultimately served as a purpose, and now they do these curated playlists on iTunes. You know, and they're like deep tracks and next steps and introduction to blah, 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 and all these things. You know, Prince obviously is a huge Prince fan, and you know, that he's almost impossible.
Yes. Yeah.
Because there's so much variety in what is out. It's like Queen. What Queen record, you know?
Yeah.
You know, to whom? Who are you talking to? Because the albums are going to be shaped very differently in that regard. Those are like, it's almost singles at that point. And then hopefully that they chase the singles down a hole. Because for me, Around the World in a Day would be the Prince album I would introduce people to, because they probably heard Let's Go Crazy and Purple Rain and all that kind of stuff. So therefore, go into this, and there's some really, it's as weird as he needs to get and as cool as he needs to get.
But again, if they have no idea who Prince is, you might have to give them the Purple Rain soundtrack.
Right.
I mean, it's like, how can you just not have that?
Yeah. I think there's almost like an of course category.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You just like, well, this of course.
Yeah.
But that's the intro conversation you end up having with somebody. Like, well, of course you're gonna listen to Master of Puppets, but or of course you're gonna listen to the Black Album, but of course, you know,
right.
Of course, you're gonna want the smell the glove from Spinal Tap. You're gonna need the soundtrack album, but you know, Christmas with the Devil is worth a listen. You know, so this is your you know. Please let us know, by the way, what your intro band is and what you have the hardest time introing, you know, people like, because, you know, I touched around Priest and the weirdness of, you know, being introduced at Turbo. What would you say is your Priest intro record? What would you like?
For Priest?
Hellbent for Leather, or is that the album, or is that I always get the covers.
That's the cover. You're gonna have here would be your choice. You have like British Steel.
Yeah.
You'd have I mean, for me, you have Defenders of the Faith. You'd have it might be British Steel for me.
Yeah, I think that's probably that'll be the one that, like, okay, this is but then, you know, like, how would you do it? Like, how do you make, you know, because back in the day, you used to make mixtapes too.
Yeah.
You know, you'd put together, like, I'm going to put together a mixtape for you so you understand this band, man.
Yeah,
like, you know,
like, well, people should they should maybe check in with us on one if they disagree with any of the ones we've thrown out, but also there has to be just a ton of bands that we didn't even touch on.
Yeah,
like who would be? We can always follow up on more with this.
Yeah, what's your intro? Let us know. You know, you like tweet us at DoubleNeck Download. Is it DoubleNeck Down?
DoubleNeck Down on Twitter, DoubleNeck Download on Instagram.
On Instagram, right? So DoubleNeck Down on Twitter and DoubleNeck Download on Instagram. Like, message us on there. And tell us, like, your favorite band and what the intro level album is, and we'll read those next time.
Yeah,
that'll be cool.
Yeah.
You know, of course, my intro albums for Kiss would be The Elder and Sonic Boom, and Come At Me, Bro. But no, it would be Paul's solo album, Hotter Than Hell. And then
Paul's second solo album.
That's right. Yeah, Live to Win. Right.
Yeah.
Which was going to be a Kiss name of a Kiss album, and then they ditched it. I think Hot in the Shade. it was going to be Who Dares Wins, which was, I think, the SAS motto, which is very British. Who dares win, lad? You know, like it's so like, you know, the U.S. Marines are like, you know, kill them all, let God sort them out, and Kill them all became an album, you know, from that, whatever. The Brits are Who dares wins, my lad. Yes, daring is the important. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, let us know. And thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Help us raise the queue of hard rock and heavy metal. You know, there aren't a lot of podcasts out there covering this genre, and we love it dearly. And we'd love to hear from you about who we'd like to have on. Now, I got into a Twitter conversation accidentally on purpose. This guy Todd Kearns.
Oh yeah, I know Todd.
Yeah,
I mean I don't know him personally, but I know who he is well.
He's a deep reads dude. I'll end on this because I'm going to ask him to be a guest on the show.
He would be a fantastic guest.
Because he plays with Slash. He plays with all. He's become this like want to need this guy on your team kind of player because he sings like a bird and he plays like a maniac. He's a great guitar player, but he ends up playing bass for Slash, I think, just so he can have him on vocals backing stuff up because he can pretty much, you know, sonically knock boots with Miles Kennedy if he needs to, and definitely locks harmonies. But the dude is so talented. And I was introduced, he was in a band called Age of Electric in Canada for a long time. Sort of grunge, but more in the rock zone of things. And then he had a band called Static and Stereo with his brother. And I just moved to Canada, and there's this song called Before My Time that was on there, that were playing in heavy rotation on Much Music. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, this sounds like classic rock to me. I love this. So I went out immediately, bought the record. The guitar solos on it are dead on Ace Frehley. They even his brother thanks, you know, like the gods at the end of it, and he's starting with Ace Frehley, like for the solos, because some of them are literal lifts. They're amazing, like note for note. It's amazing. But the album is fantastic and taught me a lot about just like pop songwriting or whatnot. But like he's one of those guys where as soon as I found out, I'm like, I love this band. They only have one record out. Who the hell is this guy? This is terrific. And then to come to find out, he had this entire catalog with Age of Electric. That I went back, I had fans, this fan of mine, Sarah, who's fantastic. Literally, she's Canadian. She's like, oh yeah, he was in all this stuff. Like, found all these EPs for me. Like, you got to listen to the Ugly EP, which he first put out with Age of Electric and all this stuff. And the guy's talent is amazing, and I'm a huge fan. And then he started messing around with Danko Jones. They were tweeting back and forth. Because they were on a podcast together, and I'm like, these guys need to do an album. And then they started going, yes, and like talking in the thread. And I was like, if I played a part in these two dudes doing an album, oh my God, you know what I mean? Like, you know, put a pin in it. And Danko Jones is one of those guys. Like, if you've never listened to Danko Jones, like people would go, they'll know Lover Call as the one single maybe. But you can jump into his pool anywhere because in the AC/DC genre, you know, what you see is what you get, right? There's no like, oh, this album's totally different from this. The albums all flow right together. It's not repetitive, but the style is so locked in. Yeah. You'll go, oh yeah, I get this band. And if you like it, you'll like everything else. It's very rare in the Danko Jones. He's one of the standouts. And by the way, if you haven't heard King's X, get Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, and listen to that. And then you'll go to, of course, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, but then you go to Out of the Silent Planet, and then I would say Tapehead and Ear Candy, and then a new album coming out. So we'll get those guys on, as well. But I want to get Todd on the show, and I'm going to get Doug on to talk about those things. Yes. So we'll
all good ideas.
Yeah, those will be coming up, and you know, people who have a deep history, and we got to reach out to the UFO guys, because that story about the
Neil
keyboard,
Carter, the
Neil
keyboard
Carter,
player who replaced Paul Raymond.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Vinnie Moore fan. Mind's Eye is incredible. But I will say, like, the story of Neil Carter just kind of like rolling into that band, like he was just teaching music theory to, you know, like, we want to go back on the road with the band. Like, it's a documentary in and of itself.
It is. It's a literal turning back of the clock. Like, if you ever had the thought of, What if a time machine appeared and
Yeah.
I could just step into it and be transported back to 20 years ago?
Right.
That's exactly what happened.
That's
to
right.
him.
That's
Yep.
right. Yeah. It's so cool. I would love to hear that story. So
Yeah.
we're gonna try and get him on as well and talk to him about that. I think that's a fantastic idea. So thanks for listening. Or watching, or however you watch this, because we got the video as well up on here, and we will, like I said, we'll be putting this together with guests. I've got a whole system where we can lock them in, we can Skype them in essentially through these Mimo call things, which are really tight. I'm saying almost anybody. So if you got guests you suggest, we'd love to hear from them as well.
Let us hear.
Yeah, and because Eddie Trunk, we're coming for you. We're coming for you. That's right. What's up? We're coming for you, man. Can't crap on all our favorite bands all the time and get away with it. You're not a critic. We're fans. You can go snipe all you want. We like these guys. Anyways, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for listening, and go listen to something heavy. Cool. Nice. And I will finish and